Well, as you can see, the title is The Ethical Entrepreneur. That sounds like a bit of a contradiction for some. But we're going to speak about vision and values, because entrepreneurs typically have a vision. And we're going to look at how that vision can come to play using the right values. And yes, how many of you are, would you say, are entrepreneurs who have started up their own business or, okay? How many are thinking of it? Yeah, okay, that's another thing. And also, it's not necessarily just your own business. Within large companies itself, there's opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities. Okay, so that's all embraced. Okay, so this is sort of the program. What is a good business? Not necessarily how much money you make, but what is a good business? Satisfies needs beautifully, serves in all quarters. Let's look at the situation in business today. See what it's like. I think there's been quite a bit of publicity about that, and I think you'll find it very interesting. And then we're going to offer a values-based approach. And basically, I'm going to offer some suggestions of the values that I think are most important for an entrepreneurial venture, and why. And some of that, as Richard said, I'll try to back up with some of my own experience in the field. And then we're going to go down to the working surface. Those of you in the philosophy might have heard about. The working surface is the decisions that are made in an organization, from the top right down to any level. And we're going to look at what are the conditions that are conducive for us to make the right decision. And the right decision can be made in a variety of different subjects, not just immoral or moral decisions, but how to make the right decisions. All right? Do you still want to stay? It's all right? All right. So, the situation today. It seems that we're inundated with stories and examples of greed and corruption within business. Is that something that you've seen more and more of late? A lot of it's been going on, but it's been accelerated now. There's a lot more examples, and it's quite interesting how it gets explained, you know, and justified. Somebody was, did anyone see the film Big Short? I haven't seen it yet, but I'm told that all sorts of immoral situations are being presented, and they say, yeah, it's okay, you know, we're going to make the money. We're going to make the money. It's okay. And the mind can convince ourselves that what we're doing is right. Now, part of the problem is that the focus is on short-term measurable goals. Quantifiably measurable goals. And so, for example, if you're a listed company, you have quarterly targets. And then companies said, all right, well, now we have to incentivize our people and give them monthly targets. And so these people, with a lot of pressure to make their monthly targets, start doing things in order to make the targets. So in a sales situation, we've seen a number of people say, look, if you give me the order by the end of the month, I'll discount it 20%. He does it, gets his order, but the company's lost that had they been willing to wait just that little bit. You maximize, for example, the CEO of BP at one point said, we're going to get rid of our whole technical staff and outsource it and save lots of money. He did, share price went up. He took a very nice 7 or 8 million that year, retired a year later, then came the Gulf oil crisis. They couldn't fix it. They were trying to depend on these other companies. That CEO who left didn't bear the brunt of the criticism. He was gone. Probably in his home in Barbados or something like that, you see. So there's a lack of good examples. And this is one of the things, if you are starting up your own business and you're in charge, you have to set the example. It's very, very crucial. And then there's a significant loss of public trust. In fact, there was an article on the 22nd of January about a survey, and they do this survey quite often. They say, which profession or field do you trust? You know, and doctors get 86%, and hairdressers get 65%. You trust your hairdresser, to speak. Business, 35%. It's been going down and down. The only ones beneath business people, what do you think? Estate agents and politicians. Estate agents. So and this is the business leaders. So this is lack of trust. Now, one of the points is we wanted to look at, just briefly, what might be a good business. And I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes. This one from the Western spiritual tradition, Pope John Paul II. Profit is a regulator of the life in a business, but not the only one. Other human and moral factors must also be considered, which in the long term are at least equally important for the life of a business. Now you see, he brings in this question of the moral factors and long term, not short term, the life of a business. Now from the Eastern tradition, Sri Shantananda Saraswati, a great sage, when asked about this question, a good business, he said, when work is for the satisfaction of the individual and also the society, if both gain from its production and its use, then it is righteous. Both gain. And there have been talks about widening, there was a mantra that was put out many years ago, maximize shareholder value. Has anyone heard of that? Remember that one? And it wasn't optimize, it was maximize. And it was taken in the wrong direction. But they were trying to at least say your stakeholders or shareholders are not only your client, it's your suppliers, it's the community, and it's society. It's a widening view that you need to look and see that all are contented, satisfied. Now, I'll just give you a brief summary of my journey, because it's been quite interesting how through a number of occasions, situations, I've been put into an entrepreneurial situation. So I mentioned starting in computers in the 60s, senior people were asking me for my advice, and I'm 22 years old, but they didn't know about computers. It was new, and new ways could be used. I then had this idea that international business was going to flourish a bit. And I studied for an MBA, and I was sent from America to Brussels to look after a European operation. It was quite interesting. That's where I found the School of Philosophy a month after I arrived. And that's when I started to get much more of a insight into these values and how they are more natural to us. And so I was asked then, would you look at the business in Europe, which was this computer, they were selling hardware. And the CEO had vision. He had vision. He said, we're going to have to look at things like software, time sharing, training, consulting. These are things in which the computer industry is going to grow at. Now, in those days, sell the hardware and give away the rest. That was the way it was. But he had a vision. So he started this new approach. So there I was put in charge of services, computer services for Europe. It was quite interesting. sitting in Brussels, arriving, not knowing the language, not knowing people I'm working for, not knowing anything about it, but it was all right. There was something intuitively in me that says it's all right. It's the unknown, but you just have to take it a step at a time. And that's one of the qualities of the entrepreneur. You're going to be starting something that's new and fresh. The rules aren't written. You're going to have to be there and be very vigilant and open and watch how it develops. Is that your experience, you people who've been running businesses? And you suddenly will see something and things open up. And that's what happened to me after I'd been there 5 or 6 years. I met the senior head of this company. And by the way, when I joined the company, there were 2,600 employees, okay, back in '64. Now, fast forward ahead about 13 years, 50,000 employees. But they still had this person with a vision, just growing. So he had a vision of computers in education. This was back, in the '70s. And I had a real interest in this, in education and training. And I met him and we spoke. And he shared with me his vision, and I could see it. Maybe not in the completeness that he saw it. But, so that's very important, that you're able to share and communicate your vision so that others can get behind you and start working. So I set up, which was the first computer-based training business in Europe back in '77. It's now called e-learning, by the way. And 40% of training in today's business is given through e-learning. So this was the startup. And we had to go in and we say computer-based training. They say, what? What does that mean? And you'd have to start to bring people to the point where they could share with you what you were offering. Before you ever got around to talking about your product or anything else, you had to bring them up so that they could see. And that's another quality that you have to do. You have to be able to meet people where they are and share that vision so they can see it. And some people you met and they clicked right with you. These were called the early adopters. They see something and took it on. So I do that for 3 years, and then the company said, we're going to close the Brussels office, and we're all moving back to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we're going to run Europe from there. So when I yawned, they thought, well, maybe you don't want to do that. What would you like to do? So I said, I would like to understand education better so that I could understand how better to use computers. Now, that's another important aspect as an entrepreneur. You have to understand the need. You really need to understand the need. So they said, no, or yeah, come back and we'll get you into one of the universities there and you can study, et cetera, et cetera. But a friend of mine said, you ought to write Oxford University, their education studies department. They're very key in helping governments form policies. So, and that's another key thing, listen, be open to suggestions, because they come and it's amazing how they give you this direction. So I wrote a letter saying, I'm sorry, I don't know very much about education. I know about technology. I'd like to look at how this might happen. Would you believe this? That week, they received a letter from the Department of Education saying, can you help advise us on a new computer-assisted learning policy the government's trying to put together? I see these letters, invite me in. I meet some of the professors. One of them was a Plato. He wrote a book on Plato and education, and I've studied that. So I was accepted on a 1-year program with headmasters and deputy heads to work together and see how computers could be used in education. But it was very fortuitous. I did that, I finished the year, and I said, computers are not for education, especially primary school at the time. They're for training. Remember, this is 1980. So you've got to also be able to be honest with yourself and make decisions. So here I am. I've been with a company for 16 years. Oh, and by the way, I had to pay my way at Oxford. They weren't going to support me. I've been with them 16 years, directorship, all the rest of it, and they say, okay, come back to Minneapolis. What's the option? The option was to come to London and set up as a self-employed consultant in computer-based training. It was a step into the unknown. And so that's one of the qualities, we'll talk about that more, fearlessness. You have to be willing to step into the unknown, and I had to live with the uncertainty is I didn't know when the next pound was going to come from. I couldn't say out, what am I going to earn this year? And I'd go out and I'd say to people, you know, I'm a consultant in computer-based training. What? What's that? So, but it was one of those things that you work on your intuition. And we kept going, got a few contracts, and then I started a company because I saw a need. Financial training for the non-financial manager. Not about accounting, but a practical course that would say, how do my decisions as a salesperson, as manufacturing, affect the finances of the company? And we developed a program, put it out in the market, and the company grew. And then, I'm going on a bit long, but I just want to, the variety of experience. 2000, when the dot-com boom came, we had the offer to become a listed company under AIM, the AIM Stock Exchange. So I went through that whole process, and yes, it became a listed company. So I'm the CEO of a listed company, and that's great prestige, and in fact, but there was so much greed there at that time. Everyone was grabbing, the venture capitalists were vulture capitalists. They wanted to get this tremendous return. In any case, I had to back off from that. My interest was expanding into international markets, China, India. I gave up my CEO role. And then later, one other business after I retired there, with some ethics training, but I'll come on to that later. All right, now, what do you think are the most prominent values in society today? What are those things that you think people are, if I have that, I'll be happy? Money. Fame, money. Politicians want to be powerful, so you can have wealth, power, fame, and the one you didn't want to mention, but we do think it's going to make us happy, pleasure. Now, in themselves, they're not wrong, right? They're not wrong, but what's happened is excess. We just don't know when to stop. Isn't this part of the problem? Whether it's obesity, whether it's addiction, we don't know when to stop. And our values are these materialistic values. And that's part of the problem. If you try and run a business and base it on, you know, what my return on assets are and all the rest of it, you're missing something. Okay, now, one of the things that happened was we formed, and in the school there are various groups, and we had a group of business people. We formed a group, Philosophy in Business, trying to look at the principles of it. And as Richard mentioned, Chris Reese and I wrote this book called From Principles to Profit. Now, very interestingly, how it happened, I was giving a talk, and one in the audience was a publisher. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I've always wanted to do a book on the moral manager. Would you do a book for us? Now, I've never done a book, or any, you know, just. So I said, well, and we showed him the material. He said, yes, that's it. So that was the next 2 years. But it was very useful in doing the research and finding out. And one of the key questions when we'd give courses and seminars was this: can I work according to fine values in business and still succeed, still make a profit? Is that practical? Or do I have to use the techniques that are present, like, you go to parts of China or India, you want to do business, and they say, look, if you want to do business here, you've got to bribe. You've got to pay facilitation payments. You have to do it. It's the way, that's business. Maybe you don't. We'll show you some examples. All right, now one other entrepreneurial experience I had began when I was 18. And I received this version of the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. And I was so inspired by it because it presented some values to me. If you can meet with triumph and disaster, those two impostors just the same. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, if you can do all that, meet the challenge, then all the world is yours and everything that's in it. And what's more, you'll be a man, my son. Well, you can imagine, it was a great inspiration. How many of you are familiar with that? Yeah. It's one of the most popular poems in the English language. It was inspired by the Bhagavad Gita, by the way, as this is background. Now, reflecting on this lack of good values or the wrong values being taken, this is about 2 years ago, I came up with an idea and said, why couldn't we present or represent values in a form using Rudyard Kipling's approach, if you can? I discussed it with a few people, and I got some wonderful ideas. One person said, for today, especially the young people, I wouldn't say, if you can. Make it, if I can. Make them say this, self-effect. If I can treat triumph and disaster, those two impostors, just the same, how does the value relate to me? And someone else said, if you want to communicate today, make an app. Right. So I discussed this with my daughters, and they explained what an app was. So then I was ready. And so, if you can, became if I can. And we came up with the idea of a daily reminder using an if I can statement. This is about love. There are 12 core values. If I can keep my face toward love's sunshine and not let the shadows of hate mess up my mind, just a statement that if I can do that, followed by a quote from different traditions, East and West, secular, spiritual, about those values. And that's one of the common points with values. All traditions, spiritual, religious, philosophic, or secular, it's a common denominator. They understand about truth, understand about love, compassion. So you've got a common language, if you will. And then, doing a bit of research, I discovered that the schools, value-based education, was really on the rise, really being more and more, because they weren't able to give religious instructions in some schools, because they had a variety of different religions or traditions. And so there's 3 organizations, and they all did something very interesting. They present material on the value to the students. They'd have the students then sit quietly, and they call it reflection or silent sitting. I know there's some people here already reflecting and silent sitting, but just reflecting, come still, and then they'd have them ask themselves an open-ended question, like, what activities or people have the effect of lighting up my life? What's a good example? Or, how can I be more generous? So you start relating it, rather than theory, to yourself. So we added that to this app, and now I'm going to show you what the core values are that I believe are essential for the success, and we'll use this format. The first, fearlessness. Fearlessness is stepping out into the unknown. It's one of the qualities of the entrepreneur. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, they give the divine values, chapter 16, and the first one is fearlessness, abhaya. So it's very important that we have that quality of being able to be in the unknown, trusting in your own judgment, your own intuition. Honesty and integrity. Part of the Chinese tradition, the three honests, honest in thought, word, and deed, that's integrity. As you think, so you speak, and thus you act. And in the company I founded, our core values were integrity and service. And it was young people that I hired. They said, what is it? And I said, we do what we say we're going to do. Even if it costs us, if we made a mistake, we make sure we do what we said we're going to do. So that's very important, because when you exercise those, you build trust. And trust is absolutely necessary for business. It's necessary for life, for all relationships. And you can begin to see how these are common. We can also see that if trust, like a vase, gets broken, ain't easy to fix it. We decided not to use that language, but is that right? You can see that that's an important factor. Now, we're not just out there making money. You need to have the sense of compassion, which is a real strength and a mark of wisdom. Again, this opening out. Einstein said, we need to widen our circles of compassion to embrace all living beings and nature in its beauty. So in your business, you widen it out, as we were saying, beyond just your clients, your employees, your suppliers. You embrace that, and this enables you to understand the need. It enables you to understand the need. Now, you start up, you're ready to go, and things don't go your way. You need determination. You have to not be distracted or diverted. I'm sure you've all, in all your ventures, you've come across these situations. In fact, I think Winston Churchill's great advice on this is never, 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 never give up. 4 times. I thought that extra time. So you've got to keep going. And that's very important. Also, you'll find that not everyone is going to agree with you. So you need to have tolerance and patience. And one of the ways here is you have to listen to what others are saying with a sense of learning as opposed to trying to defend yourself. Because we're often in a world where I'm right, you're wrong, and you're in this conflict, and you don't hear what could be very useful to you. So this is another important aspect or quality or value. Freedom. We often talk about freedom. It's one of the main qualities of a democracy, freedom and equality. But what kind of freedom we really need is freedom from our attachments. Freedom from this idea of greed, I've got to have that. Anger. Why do we get angry? We get angry because one of our desires are not being fulfilled. People don't agree with us, I'm not getting what I want. That's when anger comes. But if you're more tolerant, if you're more accepting, if you're not actually wedded to that particular thing happening my way, you'll find you won't lose so much energy, because all of these means a loss of energy. And if you have real freedom, then you can be truly creative. And this creative is not just imagining what you'd like to be. It's the kind of creative energy that comes when you're in the present moment and the idea comes, the vision comes. Here is, when you've got this creativity, it generates enthusiasm, energy. And this is also something that comes quite naturally. And so then there's a natural response when you have something and you've gained something, is to be generous, is to give. So the focus needs to be more on giving than taking. And finally, equanimity. This is this treating this success and failure, those two imposters, just the same. In our society today, everything's very competitive. You lose and you're less of a person. And that drains a lot of energy, a lot of self-belief, and you no longer trust. Okay. Now, part of our approach that we've been offering for ethical decision making, or making the right decision, has to do with coming into the present moment. How many of you are familiar with mindfulness? Yeah? It's something that more and more people know about, and in business, in schools. In fact, there was an all-party parliamentary group of more than 100 MPs who've put a report together, Mindful Nation, UK, recommending mindfulness in business, in schools, in health service, even in prisons. It's being recognized, and all it is, in its essence, is coming into the present moment. Coming still so that there's greater clarity. And you're not being pulled and pushed by the past or your imaginations of the future. And the procedure that we'd come up with is analyze the facts as well as the principles. You know, is honesty? Is it fairness? Is it justice? Make that part of your decision-making process. Come into the present moment using a very simple exercise. Reflect quietly and see what arises. When this is practiced, it's quite amazing how some people, they just say something and it just comes out, the words come out. So where did that come from? I don't know. It just arose in the stillness. And then when you make your decision, you act with courage and determination. Okay, so if you're interested in the app, the daily app, it's all free. You can go to that website. It's also available on the phone in the Apple App Store or the Google Play App Store and there's a new website that's just being put on, Timeless Values, and basically the aim of that is to gather material on values from a number of sources and make it readily available. Okay, I'm going to play you just a clip of, this is how we decided to put some ethics training out in a unique format.
That was Peter. He wants a 9 o'clock.
I'm supposed to meet.
He's rescheduled it. Something went wrong, apparently with David. He called this morning to say the board's got some issues they're not happy with. It's on hold, basically.
They were chewing my hand off 2 weeks ago.
Talk to Peter.
Oh, Chris, I'd like you to meet Jeff.
Peter's the boss. Ambitious. Good at his job. And a decent bloke, mostly.
My role is strictly consultative. I know the territory, I know the people, I know how it works. But every call's yours, okay? I take it you're happy with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously I got things a bit wrong out there, but I have to admit...
First thing you're going to have to realize is you do business their way, or you don't do business. A Wedgwood plate?
It was a nice plate.
From the airport? Okay, we've got some ground to make up, so next time you go in serious.
Next time?
Peter made some calls. We sent them a nice little gift box, so we're back on track. The deal is yours to make, but the protocol is mine to advise on. And my advice is you get him something that demonstrates the esteem in which you hold him and the value you place on doing business with his company.
Well, I'm hopeless with gifts.
I'll get something. Up to a limit, obviously.
There's always a limit. What's on your card?
No, I mean within the law. There's a limit. We can't look as if we're trying to buy favour.
Do you mind if Chris and I talk alone, please?
Ooh, hang on. Jenny's worked up.
Please? There's something you're going to have to get your head around, Chris, and I guess that's why I'm here. The law is one thing. Business is something else.
What is your response to the statement? The law is one thing, business is something else. Is that the way you see it? Is that view consistent with your personal values? Or is the desire to close the deal, to succeed, more important than obeying the law?
Well, there's more we could do. We go through a number of scenarios where you have to make decisions. And you can either say, well, pay the man, and then see what the consequences are. But the purpose of it, doing it this way, is that you actually get a sense of the pressures that you'll come under. And that chap was playing the role of putting the pressure on. You know, yes, you need to do business, you need to do... And then Jenny was sort of the conscience, reminding him about what the values are, how he should speak the truth, etc. The attitude or the answer to that question, can I work to find values in business and still succeed and still make a profit, should be, yes, I can. And you need to be resolved in that and find a way to do it. And so you have to be reminded about what those values are. But I think then you'll start to see how some of these others build a momentum. And you're doing the best in terms of a long-term sustainable business. So, questions? Any questions, comments, your own observations in business? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I can understand that because you're educating them to this culture. But if you're in their culture, in an Asian culture where
Yes.
it's required to do business, how do you keep your cultural substance when the situation is completely different?
Well, it's changing. I've given presentations at the Indian Institute of Directors, and they are promoting values. India now has a mandatory 2% of profit contribution by all companies to their CSR program, corporate social responsibility. They realize, India does, they cannot grow economically with a reputation of corruption. People won't come, won't invest money in them, so they are taking some steps. And it's quite interesting, you can use their own tradition to remind them of the, and this is what's happened.
China?
China, yes, also it's quite interesting. I spent 18 months establishing a relationship in China and the gift giving and all the rest of it. But underlying their policy is friends first, then do business. Friends you can trust. They want to establish trust. And well, again, I could go into the story, but it took us 18 months. And our Western approach is you put a contract on their desk and say, sign that, and we can do business. The lawyers have told us, you know. One of the last contracts I had for this e-learning program was with a US pharmaceutical company. They said, we'd like to use your e-learning program, but you'll have to sign our purchase agreement. Oh, sure, no problem. 47 pages. A 47-page agreement that I would have had to sign just so they could use our product. It's not the right way to do business, but it's become the way it's done. But with China, what they want to do is when something happens, they want to be able to say, all right, look, this has happened, it wasn't in our agreement, how do we deal with it? Not, you signed this, you said you were going to do that, and then you're not doing it.
Can you take one last question?
Yeah?
A huge proportion of our population works in the public sector or in charities. Your presentation is very business orientated. Don't you think that the same issues arise?
Absolutely. In fact, many charities are operating like businesses now. And they need to have that kind of values and principles. Otherwise, they lose their focus. They lose that whole, the compassion, the reasons to do it. They lose it because they become so worried about what's my return. You could say to someone, would you lie to your best friend? Would you tell a lie to your best friend? But you would be willing possibly to lie in a business situation and feel it's okay. There's almost two standards. And that's one of the problems.
Oh, just one last question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I listened to your talk before, and thank you for that. Sorry that I missed part of it. But the fact that you just mentioned about the lie, I was invited by a Swedish man many, many years ago. And he knew that I'm Iranian, Persian. So he brought a book of Avesta, which is Zoroastrian. And he opened it. The first thing that he told me, fantastic house he had and everything. He said, Zoroaster, the prophet says, the only way to be successful with business, unfortunately, you have to lie. So stay away from. And my question is this: as the whole world is becoming unified, only 2 billion people more or less can come here and have a lifestyle that is like me, which is quite fantastic. But what are we going to do for the rest of the 6 billion? Should we not try to change our mentality? And the business should be as a gift. We are giving it to people who need it.
Yeah. Well, I think that things will change. There's much more communication. And keep in mind, regardless of your nationality, we all share a common human nature. We all understand that lying is unnatural. And so we've got to appeal to these people. Now, India, for example, has 500 million people 25 and younger. The future for India is going to be those young people who say, we had enough of this corruption, this greed, we're going to change things. And that's where I think the change is going to come. And you're going to start to see more examples. That's what we need, more examples of people living values.